Hello and welcome to the Foojay Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Java EE, Jakarta EE, and their role in a cloud-first environment. Specifically, we're going to talk about what's the role of a 10-year-old server-based specification for app servers when many things in the cloud are serverless or service-based. And with the development of things like Microprofile, containers, and thin wars, there's actually a lot more than you'd expect for the current Jakarta EE, and it's nothing like its early 2000s heavyweight cousin. And with the migration from Java EE to Jakarta EE that's now hosted at the Eclipse Foundation with tons of industry contributors, there's a lot of great things for everyone.
Welcome to the Foojay Podcast, all your news about OpenJDK.
Now I'm going to go through and we're going to introduce the guests on today's podcast.
Hi there, my name is Ivar Grimstad. I'm the Jakarta EE developer advocate at Eclipse Foundation. And I'm happy to be here at the Foojay Podcast. And so thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, hello, I'm Rudy De Busscher. I'm working as product manager for Payara at the moment. So my goal is to have a nice implementation of the entire Jakarta EE spec within our products. And of course, very nice to be invited for this talk.
My name is Josh Juneau. I'm a Java EE, Jakarta EE developer and DBA by day. I'm an author and open source contributor by night. And I really appreciate the invite. This is going to be fun.
And I'm Erik. I handle developer relations for Contrast Security. We help embed security tools inside of applications and very much in the Java and Jakarta EE specification to pick out ways that those applications are vulnerable and demonstrate it to people so that they can actually fix security risk in custom and third-party code. And what we want to do to start the podcast is to go through and summarize a couple of the recent articles that have gone on Foojay that relate to Jakarta EE ecosystem. So the first one that we want to talk about, it was called, Is the Java Jakarta EE Deployment Model Out of Date? So Rudy, since you deal a lot with Payara and the presence of different Java EE and Jakarta EE specifications, do you mind summarizing this one and just giving us a little bit of background?
Yeah, sure. Well, for those that know Jakarta, you have a deployment model where you build your application within a WAR file or an EER file, and then you run it on the runtime. It's also called the application server sometimes. There is a lot of change during the last 10 years or so. There are movements of going to a fat jar application, for instance, where you combine the runtime and your application into one artifact and run it as such. But we still think that the deployment model of Jakarta EE is a very good one because the developer needs to concentrate on creating the application. It should not be working around how should I deploy this in the environment. Is the environment a cloud environment? Is the environment maybe even a Raspberry Pi? So he needs to concentrate on delivering the functionalities. The second step is then how do you get your application up and running? And that's something different. With that deployment model of Jakarta, you can perfectly balance those two. You have the developer who creates the application, and then later on the operations can deploy it and configure it wherever they like. So they don't need to care, the developers don't need to care about the infrastructure, which is always nice. They should concentrate on what they should do, providing functionality for the end user. So besides that the thin WAR file, which we have with the Jakarta, the fat jar has some advantages because it is just one single artifact that you need to install. But currently, we mentioned in the cloud era, a lot of those systems are using containers with different layers. If you package your application together with your runtime, then every single line that you change within your code results in an entire new container image that not only contains that one single change, and also includes the unchanged runtime. So that's an overhead which slows down your deployment and etc. So With that deployment model, although it is 10, 20 years old, well, that fits perfectly for your cloud environment. Because if your application changes, your WAR file changes, and only that change is pushed to your infrastructure. So for me, that are two main reasons why Jakarta deployment model is still a very good one, a very good fit for today's applications, even in a cloud environment.
Got it. And what exactly is the difference between a thin WAR and a fat WAR?
Well, yeah, so with a thin WAR file, you only have your application code, so your business logic that you have written for your application, maybe some third-party dependencies that you are required for that specific application. Only that is included within the WAR file, but not your runtime. So, for instance, Payara server or Payara micro is not included in that thin WAR file, in that artifact. That means it is much smaller. It is sometimes much smaller than 1 megabyte. And that means that it is easier to transport, it is faster, etc. And as I said, you don't need to push every time that big layer to your infrastructure because you have changed one little line of code. Because in that fat jar, there is not only your application, but the entire runtime.
I would just like to add that I really do think that there is still a place in the world for monolithic applications, and deploying to an application server container. Not every application is well suited for the microservices or cloud-based deployment. There are lots of enterprises that really rely upon application server containers. And there are also ways to make applications modular and still run them in the same container. You can have different portions of an application running in an application server container and, swap them out as needed or modify as needed. And it's still a very efficient way to run Java EE and Jakarta EE applications. So I do think that the deployment model is still valid in this era, and I think it will be valid for a long time to come.
So this actually sounds really helpful because it used to be the days of you had a server that was there and the server would already be installed with like a Payara or a web server or WebLogic. But Rudy, it sounds like what you're saying is now you can package the application server or like the Payara Microprofile runtime as part of the application so that if you need to deploy somewhere, it's not like you're deploying to this pre-existing server that's been set up. It seems like you're deploying the whole application all in one, which probably makes it easy to go, especially to like a horizontally scalable environment.
It is possible, but it's not a requirement because, as I mentioned, you can easily do the same thing, even the horizontal scaling, without having a fat jar file. So the fact that you choose to include the runtime yes or no, that has nothing to do how you're going to run it. So you can indeed include within your application the Payara micro runtime, but you can also keep it outside of it. So you can start Payara micro like a Java -jar option. So you start the runtime as a simple Java application, and then you point to the WAR file, and it loads that WAR file at the same time it is running your Payara micro application. So it is a possibility. We have included it for those who want it, but it's not a requirement. So that deployment model of a separate WAR file, you can still use it today, even with that more modern approach of that Payara micro, which is not really an installable artifact, but you just run it and it installs it during the boot of the runtime itself.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like the Jakarta EE deployment model is still modern and definitely not out of date because you can change it to whatever you want it to be given the way that your application works.
Yes, correct.
Nice. All right, and with that, with the Java deployment model being present in date, we have right now we're in kind of a cloud-first world where everybody wants to deploy things up into the cloud. You've got AWS, you've got Azure, you've got GCP, and you have all these different areas with servers and services. So one of the other articles that we had on Foojay is also called Is Java and Jakarta EE Cloud Native? So when we talk about the deployment model, what can we say about the cloud readiness of Java and Jakarta EE?
Yeah, this article is actually a kind of a pointer to a webinar series that Steve Millich from Payara did. And I would really encourage everybody who has the time over to go and look at that webinar. It's is it 5 or 6 episodes, and they're all very relevant and absolutely something you should listen into. And it actually, this article ties very well into the things that Rudy was talking about, and is Java or Jakarta EE cloud native, and how do you run the application securely in the cloud? And to be able to talk about this, you kind of have to define what is cloud native, and to really define cloud native, I'll actually read some of this stuff from the Cloud Native Foundation where they define cloud native, and that is: cloud native technologies empower organizations to build and run scalable applications in modern dynamic environments such as public, private, and hybrid clouds. So that is one part of it. So you're actually running, if you're running and able to run your application in a cloud environment, you're actually cloud native, sort of. The other thing is that the Cloud Native Computing Foundation seeks to drive adoption of this paradigm by fostering and sustaining an ecosystem of open source vendor neutral projects. And when you talk about open source and vendor neutral, that's where Eclipse Foundation fits in, and that's where Jakarta EE fits in. So all these technologies within Jakarta EE are vendor neutral, they're open standards, so you can build your applications and deploy to any cloud that offers them. And one interesting thing, if we tie back to the article that Rudy was talking about, is the old style of developing Java EE and Jakarta EE application servers applications, where that you had your server running somewhere down in the basement or somewhere, often under the desk of the developer, but we don't talk about that. So you would deploy your application to the application server, and you wouldn't only deploy one application, you would deploy 2 or 3 and all your applications into the same application server, so that they were all running on this poor little machine under the desktop. And this way of deployment, that's not actually how you do things today when you develop a modern Jakarta EE application. The way you do it today is that you have one application server and one application. So you deploy one application into your application server, and then you wrap that in a container or somewhere and run it wherever you want. And if you think about this model, the previous model where you had all the applications and stuff them into your application server, well, that's actually what we're doing today when we're taking all our applications and smashing it into a Kubernetes cluster and let that stuff manage everything. So it's kind of the same thing. We just added the deployment thingy to it. So all developers are now, in addition to writing the actual code that earns you money, the functionality code that Rudy was talking about, what you should focus on, we're also writing a lot of YAML to kind of orchestrate all these containers. And if you think about how Jakarta EE and the model that we used to have the ability to deploy all applications into a server that somebody else was taking care of. If you have a system like, for example, Payara Cloud or other providers out there where they manage these application servers in a way that they scale horizontally as much as you want, and you as a developer, you focus on building your application in the thin war and throw it down the cloud and let them handle it. That's kind of the dream world for a developer. And when you add these open standards and open source APIs that you're using, if I want to move to another vendor, well, I'll take my ThinWar or my Jakarta EE application and deploy it on another cloud. As long as I follow the standards, there's no vendor tie-in, and I can deploy it anywhere I want in any cloud and let the people that actually know how to configure these things configure them for me. So I can focus on making money. After all, we are Java developers and not configuration script developers.
Yeah, one of the ways that I deploy some of the code that I work on in my spare time, Java developer by night, Josh, to play off your term, I've really taken a liking to the Quarkus framework. And so I just write a bunch of web actions that I test locally on my own system through just straight up HTTP. Then I native compile it, and I can automatically push it up into AWS Lambda or Azure Functions, and the whole thing just works there immediately. And it takes care of the API gateway. It takes care of the execution, and it's the code that I've written, tested locally, running native serverless on the cloud.
Yeah, and when you actually think about that, you're using the same APIs, the same technologies as you would use if you're writing a monolithic application for a bank in a server vault, or if you're creating microservices, or if you're creating serverless functions. It's all Jakarta EE APIs. It's all the same technology. So it's very flexible and can address any needs you would have as a developer.
Yeah, it's actually what I've been doing. I think it's amazing because locally it's a monolith. When I deploy it to the AWS Lambda, it's no longer monolithic, or maybe it is. I don't really know the details, but the whole thing just runs. And I was talking with Adam Bean a while ago, and he tells me that it's actually just using Microprofile under the hood.
Oh yeah, so Quarkus supports some of the Microprofile APIs, and also they incorporate a lot of Jakarta technologies as well as Spring technologies. So they have the possibility to package a lot of stuff in that runtime.
All right, Josh, what are you deploying up into cloud native applications through just the standard Jakarta EE specification? Like, how often are you seeing people use that, and how often do you use it yourself?
Actually, I'm a bad person to ask on that one because I don't really deploy to the cloud. So.
That's all right. So you just have a really cool environment, maybe under your desk, the area that we're not supposed to talk about?
My server is under the desk. No, we do have kind of a local server environment that I deploy to, and so it's not really cloud-based yet. It works very well for our needs, and it does seem, though, that most of the applications that I am working with are either still in the monolithic format, or we are broken out into individual services that are run in separate WAR files, and those are then deployed to the scalable Payara server or another local application server container that is just on a server, a virtual server, sitting in the environment.
Okay, so this is probably one of the reasons why it's beneficial that Jakarta EE is both cloud native and can also run locally, because I used to do a lot of cost analysis of companies that would do migrations to the cloud, and some of them would consume like 3 times their budget in about a fourth of their annual cost. So imagine something costing 3 times the amount of your yearly spend in about a fourth of that time. Like, it's insanely expensive. So what would happen is, even though I know as like developers and people in technology, we're supposed to talk about everything moving to the cloud, a lot of these organizations would start to move there, and then they'd say, whoa, we got to scale this stuff back. And then they would put it into a data center or something that ran in the on-premises environment, just purely on a cost and effort basis. So I know it's real common for a lot of organizations to mix and match both of these.
Yeah, and I do believe that there are some security considerations for those who, some organizations that do not want to be in the cloud for that reason, or, it's just not an acceptable approach in some circumstances. So having the ability to, choose, be dynamic and deploy to the cloud or deploy to a local server environment, it really is beneficial.
Maybe I can comment on this, that we see when our customers are using it, that you have the entire range. You have people who just run it on a physical hardware, so a physical server that is indeed stored somewhere under the desktop or in a separate room. We see them environments with virtual machines locally or within a data center. We see them running on Azure and AWS. So we see the entire range of options and possibilities used within our customer base. So that's, I think, one of the benefits. You can choose what suits you most. And indeed, migration to the cloud can be sometimes costly because maybe they want to do more than they need to do. As Ivar mentioned, what is cloud native? Basically, it is running within a cloud environment, making use of those cloud resources, like maybe monitoring and routing, etc., a bit of automation, but nothing prevents you from using whatever technology you like for that cloud native solution. So Jakarta EE perfectly matches within that image.
All right. Yeah, I think the only thing that I like what I'm seeing in the Jakarta EE space and in all these Foojay articles. I think probably the only thing I don't like is something called Bettridge's Law of Headlines, which is more a journalist activity that anytime a question or anytime a headline is a question that can be answered yes or no, the answer is usually no. But in this case, the answer is yes. So it's a bit of a headline state that we could probably change that. Because it seems like this is a really beneficial thing that makes it easy to deploy an application, whether that runs locally as a monolith in the environment we're not supposed to talk about, or up in the cloud.
And I agree. That's just, again, to repeat it, that's one of the major benefits of running with Jakarta EE is you've got that flexibility to run it where you like and however it best suits your organization.
Yeah, and to come back to that story where we say that developers need to focus on functionality and not about their environment or even writing YAML, because a lot of people don't like writing YAML and all those kind of things. That is actually the goal of our product, which we have now in the pipeline, which is called Payara Cloud, that you only need to worry about that WAR file, and you upload that WAR file into the environment, and the environment takes care of deploying it for you. So you have the ability to specify some parameters, like configuration parameters, like where is my database located, or which are the values of my configuration parameters. But after that, it takes care of creating the container image for you. It takes care of deploying that within for the moment, the Azure environment, and they're running it on a Kubernetes system. So you don't need to write a YAML yourself. It's done for you. It takes care of providing the routing. It takes care of the SSL configuration so that you have your application with secure endpoints, etc. So again, that's the same deployment model as Jakarta. You just deploy your WAR file, as Ivar said, throw it on the cloud, and the cloud knows what to do with it. That's the main idea of what we are doing now with Payara Cloud. For the moment, we don't have the opportunity to have a free trial, but it is just the deploying of your WAR file in an environment. So it is exactly the same as what you do when you would run Payara server locally. So in that sense, it works as expected with if you know Payara.
Cool. So if I want to try that, I can just go ahead and use Payara server or deploy any more that I want to my local system, and it's basically the same thing. Just I have less scalability because I don't need that when I test.
Yes, correct. So we are working on some scalability features and functionality, but in the first version, it is just running your application as it is. Later on, we will adding the options to have your scalability defined based on the numbers of requests or the load of your environment, for instance.
One of the other good articles that came into the Foojay environment was just another question of why Java developers continue to rely on Jakarta EE. And we've been talking about a lot of this over time of how it simplifies deployment in terms of writing a single application and just being able to help someone else manage the infrastructure. But Josh, do you want to talk a little bit about why developers are still relying on Jakarta EE and Java EE?
Sure, that one is easy. I think it's standardization. for years now, the Jakarta EE platform may be named different, but it still uses the same APIs as Java EE has been using for years. I think if you go back to Java EE 5, the platform started to change into a more modern platform. So at that point, we started to see easier deployment for EJBs and APIs that made things much easier to use. And then from there, you move on to EE 6 and 7, and things got much more streamlined and much more easy to develop and much more sophisticated without all of the XML configuration and whatnot that was required in the early days of Java EE. And so now today, if you go to Jakarta EE, is very much the same as we had in Java EE 8, but now there is a new namespace. So instead of using JavaX, you'll use Jakarta, and that is basically the only difference at this point. However, it is more geared towards the cloud because at this point there are more APIs that are going to be added. It's more extensible, and it works very well with solutions such as Microprofile, very pluggable, and so you have flexibility in your architecture, and you can use things that you'd like to use or not use other portions of the platform. So that's another benefit, is that there are multiple profiles for Jakarta EE. You can, if you think you are going to be building an application or a service that wants to make use of everything that's part of Jakarta EE, you can do that. Otherwise, if you only want to use certain pieces of the platform, there's a web profile. And I know in the future, there are discussions about making even more profiles to make things more streamlined. Another nice thing is, as mentioned by Ivar earlier, the backward compatibility and standardization. Like I had mentioned, really, if you're building a Jakarta EE application, you can still utilize all of that functionality that was built possibly years ago on an earlier version of Java EE. You may have a little bit of import changes to make with your namespace conversion, but it's still basically the same underlying APIs, which gives you nice stability. And it's also very easy to configure. As I had mentioned, there are very little to no lines of XML that need to be written nowadays to deploy. You can, if you would like to configure and fine-tune things, utilize XML, but most of this now is this configuration is happening in annotations. So there is much less configuration that is needed and much more programming, or excuse me, I shouldn't say much more, but it's much more on the developer side, where we can use nice features such as annotations to do our configuration rather than going into XML. And also there are lots of different containers that are compatible with Jakarta EE. If you go and look at the Jakarta EE site right now, you can see the compatible implementations. And so you've got lots of flexibility on where you'd like to deploy. You may build an application using Glassfish and then deploy to something like Payara, or you can go to Wildfly or some other container of your choosing. So you've got lots of flexibility for the different deployment containers that you choose.
So in terms of an application migration, I know we have a lot of years of Java EE, and I do agree. Everything that I use is annotations based, and I typically have an environment or properties file that specifies like where the database or where the message queue is. So it's really easy. This notion that it's heavyweight and stuff, at least I haven't found that for over 15 years or so. So Ivar, as the Eclipse Foundation kind of became the new steward of the Jakarta EE and you have the namespace change, what are some of the things that people do to manage those import statements and just make a simple migration to take advantage of the new ecosystem?
So you have several opportunities there. And but before I go there, I just also want to add something to what Josh said here. And also you have from before you were thinking of a Jakarta EE or Java EE application server as something big and heavy, but the implementations nowadays, the modern implementations of compatible implementations of Jakarta EE are much more streamlined and smaller than ever, and they are so modular that you only kind of get what you need. So you can configure them to just pick the pieces that you actually need in your application and have a minimal runtime out of it. So it's not like you need the entire WebSphere or WebLogic or you name it. You kind of get the pieces that you need. So the namespace migration, and this is actually something that is relevant not only for Jakarta EE developers, because if you think about it, if you're using Spring Framework, you're probably running it on a Tomcat embedded in Spring Boot or Jetty or something, and all of these are on the Jakarta namespace. So it will affect other developers than those who are pure Jakarta EE developers. And there are tools to help you with it. It's not that hard to do manually, but if you want to do it by just having your bytecode transformed, you can use a tool called the Eclipse transformer. That will take your bytecode and change it from the JavaX namespace to the Jakarta namespace. Now, if you don't want to use the Eclipse tool, you can go to Apache and find the Apache Tomcat migration tool, which will do the same thing. So you can pick and choose what tool you want. And if you don't want to do this and stick to the JavaX namespace, well, most of these implementations of Jakarta EE actually embed the transformer or similar tooling in the runtime, so you can deploy your JavaX-based application, and it will be at runtime transformed to Jakarta and run as if it were on the new namespace. What I would recommend a developer to do, if you can do it, is to actually do the change yourself and transform it and not do the bytecode manipulation. And for that, good luck. There's tooling there as well. The latest version of IntelliJ has built-in migration support. So you can just open up your application on the JavaX namespace, click migrate to Jakarta, and you're done. So there are lots of options out there to do this stuff for you. There are no reason to wait. It's just go in there and click migrate and you're done.
Wow, that's cool. I didn't know that the IDE would literally just go ahead and do it for you for your custom code.
Yeah, it will. I'm not sure if it's actually out there or if it's still a beta, but the next version of IntelliJ will definitely support this.
Yeah, that sounds like something that they would be doing, but that's just, I mean, that's cool because now you can take credit for it and then maybe spend some time, go do something else for a while and say, oh, I spent 2 hours changing something and, kick back and relax, I guess.
Exactly.
Rudy, question. Does Payara, the current versions of Payara server, don't they use the Eclipse transformer if you would like to utilize the Jakarta namespace?
Yes, correct. Our current version of Payara 5 uses the transformer so that you can use the newer versions, the Jakarta-based namespace applications on your existing Payara 5, so you don't need to change. The reason behind that is that maybe you have a larger organization and you don't want to switch in at a certain moment, so that you can do a gradual switch from one namespace to the other. And as Ivar mentioned, I think all vendors have that also in their newer product based on the Jakarta namespace, because Java EE and also Jakarta EE is known for its backwards compatibility. You also mentioned it, Josh. So this namespace change, although it was required for legal reasons, is of course a big event in the community, because it is for the first time in let's say 20 years that such thing happened, that there is a major breaking change, that something potentially did not work from before. So that's the reason why all those vendors put it in their product, so that the ease of migration is easier and can be managed more gradually.
Yeah, even though that namespace migration looks like a big event on paper, I haven't really seen too many problems or difficulties with it. Like almost everything that I see works just fine. I'm sure I've probably seen something not work, but like I'm trying to think of it now and I can't come up with an example. I'm just kind of keeping a door open to pretend that something isn't.
Yeah, and what we also see is that most products, open source projects and others out there are adopting the namespace. So you can already run Hibernate with the Jakarta namespace. And as I mentioned, Jetty and Tomcat, the next major versions of Spring Framework and Spring Boot will also adopt the Jakarta namespace. Because if you think about it, if you're using Spring Framework, you're using a lot of Jakarta EE code underneath. And also some of them are actually exposed to you, like bean validation is used directly in Spring, as well as as I mentioned, the Hibernate for persistence. So when these kind of products are moving to the Jakarta namespace, Spring Framework will follow, and then you will see all the major group of developers moving over to Jakarta namespace as well.
Yeah, there's so much cool stuff here. I know I talk to people all the time who say, haha, I don't use EE, I use Spring. And, you just kind of sit there and you go, oh, but did you know it actually uses EE under the hood? So congratulations, you are actually using it.
Yeah, that's right.
Or I know I like I said, I'm a big fan of Quarkus because it has made a lot of good decisions and kind of gives me an easy to develop with framework. And when I was having that conversation with Adam, I was surprised how much of it is actually just picking up parts of Jakarta EE and like showing them to me.
Yeah, and one thing we're actually working on, you mentioned it briefly previously, for Jakarta EE10, we are introducing a new profile, which we're calling the core profile. And one of the goals of this profile is to make runtimes like Quarkus able to be certified on Jakarta as well. So we're creating a subset of technologies and also streamlining some of them that it makes it easier to do the native compilation that Quarkus does. So you would be able to have smaller runtimes that are certified Jakarta EE core profile and be compiling to native. So that's a step in the even further a step in the direction of the cloud.
Cool. Yeah, I remember the last thing that I natively compiled, it went from about a 70 megabyte deployable to about a 20 megabyte deployable and is, I think, about 5 times faster.
Yeah, so when you're doing that, you can kind of stop talking about Jakarta EE being big and slow.
Yeah, my stuff starts up in like 100 milliseconds, so like slow is not the word I would use.
Yeah. And what we're also working on now is, as I said, we're working on Jakarta EE10. And actually, last week we announced the release plan for Jakarta EE10. And we are going to start releasing the individual specifications as soon as in October. And continue that release process because there are some dependencies between them. So just do it slowly and carefully and make sure everything is right. And then be able to release a version of platform and the web profile in Q1 next year. And the core profile will follow shortly after that. So we will have, we're doing something new here by releasing the profiles independently. And we're doing it approximately a year after the last release. So it's a pretty fast pace of development going on there in Jakarta EE right now.
All right, so if we want to get started and use Jakarta EE 9 today, which is the current version, what level of support is there for building the applications, whether it's a greenfield app or whether we're doing the migrations? Like what tools are people using?
Well, I know that Apache NetBeans 12.4 has Jakarta EE 9 support in it. You can also use 12.5, which is currently in beta, and that will allow you to use Glassfish 6. So there is support out there, and Actually, for the namespace migration is very easy to do as well. You can just go ahead and start to create applications in NetBeans and use Jakarta EE9 as your specification, and then just start to use the new namespace, and everything seems to work seamlessly. And I know that also, as Ivar had mentioned earlier, IntelliJ has support for Jakarta EE9 as well. I'm not sure, does anyone know about Eclipse?
They do have some support for some of the APIs. There is a project that is pretty interesting going on in Eclipse Foundation. It's mainly driven by some students that are being guided by engineers from IBM, which is a language server for Jakarta EE. So they're developing a language server for some of the APIs, and these are running very smoothly and nicely in the Eclipse IDE as well. And this is a open standard language server protocol. So basically every IDE could use it if they wanted to.
Cool. So that'll help people simplify the migration of ensuring their application is up to date as they bring their start times down to like the 100 millisecond that modern Jakarta EE gets.
Another thing that should be mentioned is that there is a landing page now on the web, such as with other frameworks. You can go ahead and just create a standard out-of-the-box Jakarta EE application just with a click of a button now, integrating in whatever technologies you'd like to use, and then to deploy it, and it will just go ahead and run.
Oh, cool. So kind of like the Spring Initializer or the code.quarkus, where you just say, like, I want this and this, and it gives you a skeleton project where you have, like, only the parts of the spec that you need and nothing else?
Yeah, that's correct. You can choose what you'd like to use. And also the other solution is if you're using Microprofile, which is also a Jakarta EE compliant, that also has a similar interface on the web. So easy to create an application that is just a very small skeleton application and build up from there if you want to create from scratch.
Yes, indeed. There are exciting times. It's not that because Jakarta or the ancestor Java EE is 20 years old that you cannot use with modern technologies. You can just deploy it where you like. For example, Payara Cloud is there a nice one for. So yeah, we are very keen to see the next steps with Jakarta EE10, the new functionality and features, and beyond that, because it seems to have regain again a lot of growth, and we are happy then, of course, because we are a big fan of Jakarta EE.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that the technology can live on for so many years and still be vibrant. We have a large community of contributors. There are companies and there are individuals, and we're always looking for more. So if you are interested in participating within Jakarta EE, go to jakarta.ee, connect with us, and start joining developing this excellent technology.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of cool and really great stuff going on, and it's really easy to use. It's really easy to use locally, and it's really easy to use up in the cloud. So I think a lot of great things have been getting done in that ecosystem. All right, thank you all very much for attending today's podcast, and I want to thank everyone else for listening.
Give me a foo, give me a J, give me the friends of OpenJDK.